v0, we think, is a second act for Vercel. We said, hey, we think if we operate this more as its own startup and have that built on top of Vercel and give each other bidirectional feedback, we think that's going to allow us to move faster and better serve this different audience. What's surprising to me is how much the PLG motion actually feeds the enterprise motion. We see at almost every one of these enterprises, there's a handful of people who started using it nights and weekends. For our free and self-serve users, about 60% of usage is nights and weekends, which is mind-boggling. And they started using it nights and weekends, and they got kind of addicted, or they started to realize, wow, this can actually really transform what I can do.
Right.
And then they come to us and say, I need this for every product manager at my organization.
Right.
The best pricing teams in the world are very intimately connected with their engineering counterparts. There was a hypothesis that token costs would fall to zero. I think a year ago, people were really excited about that, and people kept saying like, oh, token costs are going to cost nothing. So especially around when DeepSeek came out,
Right.
that has not come to pass.
Welcome. This is Second Acts, a podcast where we document how SaaS leaders chart the exacting foundational shifts of scaling up. And I'm your host, Krish Subramanian, co-founder and CEO at ChargeBee. This season, we are diving into AI's all-out enterprise embrace and how that's accelerating Second Acts everywhere, reshaping software categories, business models, and teams to meet never-before-seen stakes. Now, on to the episode. This week's guest, Zeb Hermann, joined Vercel with a mandate to lead projects with an asymmetric upside, beginning with monetization and their fledgling AI initiatives. He wrote then, if we get these things right, we have this opportunity to meaningfully inflect the business. That's exactly what we have done. We have scaled complex infra pricing across dozens of SKUs, and v0, one of their AI efforts, is now among the fastest growing software products ever built and has become Vercel's defining second act. Zeb now focuses solely on scaling v0 as a GM as they chart the goal of enabling 100 million builders. In this conversation, we spoke about what Zeb learned about scaling ambition, first as a GTM leader at Segment and then as a partner at Sequoia, how v0 is structured as a startup, and more importantly, customer zero to be precise within Vercel. What they mean when they say no long-term random acts of AI. Why it takes Caltech PHDs to run pricing at Vercel. How the pricing teams are intimately connected with engineering. Why Zeb believes that the token markup era of AI monetization is coming to a close and the hybrid shape he feels it will assume. Their radical 2-year vision for v0, the 2 books he recommends most, Algorithms to Live By and Scale, and so much more. Let's dive in. Zeb, thank you so much for joining us. It's
I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. And you said you're joining from Portland, Oregon.
Today I'm in Portland, Oregon. Yesterday, San Francisco. Last week, New York. So all over the place.
And I'm dialing in from Washington, D.C., even though now my home is Amsterdam. Awesome. Right. I'll start with the introduction question. Right. Vercel and v0 don't need an introduction, and yet I think it'll be great to hear how you describe v0's mission.
Yeah. I'll start with Vercel, actually. I don't know if folks are familiar with it. Vercel, what they did really is make it incredibly easy to build new applications with much of their open source software, and then especially to deploy and host those things. So what that has done is it's expanded the universe of people that can be engineers or web developers. A handful of years ago, that number was below 10 million. Now it's 30 million plus. v0, we think, is a second act for Vercel. They can take that number and expand it substantially more. So I like to talk about the next 100 million developers. I was recently on stage with Nikita, the CEO and founder of Neon. I guess he's now a VP at Databricks because they were acquired.
Right.
And he's excited about the next billion. So maybe my sights are not set high enough, but v0 is really a tool that lets anybody explore an idea they have and turn that idea into a working application or tool.
Brilliant. And I would love to talk about your journey first. Right. So before joining Vercel, you had spent years in go-to-market leadership at Segment, and you had co-founded Revenue Growth Partners, a consulting firm specializing in fractional CRO roles, and you also had been a partner at Sequoia. Can you tell us that journey and some of the most influential scaling lessons that you had learned during those years?
Yeah, it's a lot to cover, so I'll probably hit on maybe two of the most useful points. One of them is the person who I worked for most of my time at Segment was a man named Shenya Loganov. He's now a partner in Excel Europe. After Segment, he ran go-to-market at Miro, and was generally quite successful in his career, and now he's a venture capitalist. What he showed me is the importance of a handful of things. One is building teams of incredibly high caliber people. Another one is deeply understanding the details. I think there's a mythology for leaders that you can delegate and just hire good people and that they will get things done. And what I saw from him instead is like, I'm going to go 15 levels deep into how our customer success ticketing system works, as an example. Um, and then especially how to think about bets, like a portfolio of bets across the business. And like, if we want to hit our goals 18 months from now, we need to be investing in 12 different places and know that two of those are going to work amazingly well. Six of them are not going to work at all, and the other ones will be middling. But if we instead choose to only do three things, we're probably going to have a similar distribution of outcomes, and we're just curtailing our future growth by not sufficiently diversifying our set of bets.
Wow.
Sequoia was the other place that was really influential for me. And the question I always think about is something that Ruloff, who runs Sequoia US now, asked all the time, which is, what is the scale of your ambition? I frequently see people on my teams who are thinking about like, how can we take this product and make it 2% better, right? Or how can we save $10,000? And the magnitude of that impact is de minimis. I think it does matter if you're a very scaled product, but for something like v0, that's very nascent. What we need to be thinking about is, how can we take this from something people use for this use case to something people use for the next 15 use cases, right? Or how can we take this product that people use 3 times a week and make it something you use 15 times a week? So I love that question of what is the scale of your ambition?
Beautiful, beautiful. I think recently I was reading this article about systematizing experimentation, but almost in a disruptive way. You constantly are like thinking in experimentation and hypothesis-driven experimentation, right? And some of what you said was what was stressed upon in that, which is how do you do that? Because you cannot afford to take very few bets that you somehow believe will deliver success. Have you even thought about the like coming up with the 3 ideas or 5 ideas easy, but can you actually write the 50th idea, 45th and 50th idea? That's harder. And then creating a machinery that can run so many more experiments is even more harder. It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
exactly. Yeah, the way I think about that actually is that it's really more about the team and the culture you create. So I am pretty bearish on top-down experimentation, where like I write the list of 15 things. I'm not excited about that at all. I think specifically what you said about creating missionaries, I found it's almost impossible to give somebody number 12 on the list and tell them it's the most important thing and get them excited. What I'm very excited about, on the other hand, is creating a culture where teams work individuals on the team work in very small groups, right? One or two or three people. They're exposed to a huge amount of like customer and market data and feedback on like what's
Yeah.
important and what people are asking for. And then they get to make their own choices about things to experiment with or things to try. That has worked really well. And lots of the best features, like as an example, design mode in v0 is probably our most loved feature. It came from an incredible engineer on my team who was just thinking about this feedback we got from customers of like, it's very hard to get the model to tweak this last little bit. And I know exactly what I want to change. And in a hackathon, in basically 48 hours, he built a working version of it. So that approach to like the that list that you described is going to come from the team. It's going to be self-organized. If we create the right set of inputs, we have the right caliber of people, and then we have the right culture around it.
Beautiful. And I also see that your product itself is designed to enable that in many ways, right? When we think about go to market and website and testing generally, the biggest limitation is always the tech stack, right? And that is the first biggest blocker on how quickly you can take ideas to execution. And when I met Guillermo, he was actually specifically talking about this, right? Do you want to do localization? Should not be a question. The answer is yes. How quickly can you do it? And yeah, it's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. So in your LinkedIn post announcing your first role, VP Strategy and Insights at Vercel, you had written that you'd be leading areas with asymmetric upside. And you had listed 4 among those. One is self-serve revenue, pricing and packaging, long-term strategy, and special projects, which I am assuming that v0 was one of those special projects. And can you talk to us a little bit about that asymmetric upside, and also how each of those areas carried the sort of asymmetric upside for Vercel, especially at this stage of growth?
Yeah, I think where the asymmetric upside is changes over time, right? When I joined Vercel, I would say it was more about taking the existing business, which worked, and making it much more effective, right? So things like pricing and packaging, we got feedback constantly that Vercel is expensive. It was like one of the top three things that Guillermo, the CEO, talked to the board about in every board meeting for the first, I think, 5 while I was here. So fixing that issue, which was not, it was a lot of change management. It was a lot of good analytical work to look at the market and say, like, here's what people are paying for compute on these other platforms. Here's what they're paying on Vercel. Let's make that number look much more like the rest of the market. That was an area that was incredibly important when I joined. It was the top 3 CEO priority for months and months and months. Today, I would say that's less important to Vercel because we've largely fixed that issue. There's still ongoing pricing and packaging stuff that needs to happen as we release many new products. But is it a place where I would say there's uh, outstanding amount of asymmetric upside? Less so. Nowadays, what I look at is more the theme of your podcast. It's second acts, it's third acts. It's what are the adjacent products that we can build that can turn this from a single product company, which is basically a seamless way to build, host, deploy Next.js applications, into a much broader suite of things. So we're thinking about Python support for Vercel. We're thinking about v0. We're thinking about products adjacent to v0 that help people at other stages of the software development lifecycle. And those new products or new product bets, that feels like the place nowadays that represents the largest area of asymmetric upside.
Brilliant. Amazing. Adjacent question, like one of the tenets behind Vercel's AI initiative was, I think, no random acts of AI. What does it mean in practice, and how do you assess whether a project is indeed falling into that, or falling for that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I actually would say no long-term random acts of AI. I think short-term random acts of AI are kind of beautiful, and it goes back to that culture of empowering the team to try things. So as an example, one of our teams built a refund bot that uses an LLM to analyze both the stuff that a user tells us and then all the data we have around them. Like, is this a repeat person that keeps spamming us for refunds, or is this somebody that's frustrated or accidentally bought the wrong product, etc. That came as what I would describe as a random act of AI. It was done, I believe, by one of our customer support engineers. There wasn't like a long-term plan to sustain it, but it's an incredible product. People love it, and it's a very customer centric thing to do, where when somebody is frustrated, rather than make them go through a multi-day or week thing to get their $20 back, you just figure out a way to give it to them in the first 2 minutes of frustration. That started as a random act of AI. Now it's an owned product that we have, what we call the support product area, that does a whole bunch of these types of automations. They own it. So nowadays, I think the way I look at it is more, we want, back to that portfolio of bets, we want to try many, many things. We want almost all of them to fail, because the set of them that we want to own long term is really the ones that were most successful. And so if we have random acts of AI, they should be short term. They should be things that people build in hackathons. They should be side projects that people are just experimenting with. And then as soon as we know it works and it's something impactful, we need to move that to a long term, durably owned team.
That's a very good mental model. Thank you for sharing that. And the other core tenet of always being customer zero and dog fooding eventually led to the team launching AI SDK and v0. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that Vercel does incredibly well. We have a huge dog fooding culture. One of the things that we set up when we decided to operate v0 as more of an independent team as opposed to embedded group within the core Vercel is we wanted to be even more so customer zero for Vercel. So we wanted to build on top of the same APIs that other applications built on top of Vercel use. We wanted to use all of the products and give feedback when a product doesn't meet the standards that we found in other options in the market. That mentality, that approach of we're going to very extensively use all of the different products that we have available to ourselves, and we're going to give each other feedback and hold each other accountable to making them better, has worked extremely well. So for my team, yeah, built on top of the AI SDK, using the AI Gateway, which is a new product that was largely inspired by the needs of v0. Um, and a variety of other things like Vercel's billing platform or accounts structure, et cetera. Um, what what works really well about that is using it, and then this culture of like being very open and direct about the feedback we have, right? So
Right.
our new sandbox product, incredible product, super valuable for me. We have a use case for it that it's exactly what we need, except that it's missing a couple of features, one of which we already shipped, right? So the amount of time that you could run a sandbox when it first rolled out was 45 minutes. For many of our users, that just doesn't work at all. And so there was some of the first feedback we gave is like, hey, we're trying to use this, we're using it internally, and this time limit is just wrong, right? We need that number to be much longer. So now that team is marching towards basically sandbox that can run in perpetuity, which is much more appropriate for our use case. And the directness of conversation and the pace of feedback that you can get when it's an internal team to another internal team is just amazing. It's very different than you release it, you wait for enterprises or customers to start using it. 3 months later, you start getting feedback, or they just churn and they don't even tell you. This kind of
Right.
internal dog food everything approach works very well for us.
Right. Beautiful, beautiful. And Guillermo has described v0 as a Series A startup within Vercel, right? And recently, while speaking with Brian Balfour of Reforge, he defined the team at HubSpot that led the second acts for the sales space in very similar terms, right? So, in terms of reporting structure, how do things work at v0? What distinct business outcomes, like serving a different persona than Vercel's, has it helped you solve for?
Yeah, so what we ended up with, so we did a bunch of thinking about this. We think generally org decisions are things you should do the work before making. It's not a great place to do quick experimentation. And what we realized is that the customer base and the use cases for v0 were fairly distinct from the core Vercel product, right? So v0, we see lots of somewhat technical people. We see PMs in particular. They absolutely love this product. It's like, I've never seen a product with this type of traction for product managers. We see especially early stage founders and the ones who are less technical. They love it. We see consultants. There's this whole variety of folks. Most of those folks didn't have a reason to use Vercel in the past. So because of that, we looked at v0 as more of an application built on top of Vercel. And it goes back to that customer zero relationship. We said, hey, we think if we operate this more as its own startup and have that built on top of Vercel and give each other bidirectional feedback, we think that's going to allow us to move faster and better serve this different audience, right? Because if all of Vercel is set up to serve web developers and engineers. And if we use those same ethos and same ways of making decisions to serve product managers and founders and consultants, it's going to be, we're likely to make suboptimal decisions, basically. So the org structure we ended up with, I'm the general manager. I run the whole v0 group. We have two key leaders within v0. We have Ranisha, who runs go-to-market, sales, etc. And then we have Rahul, who runs the engineering side. There's a handful of other folks like designers and PMs, a couple of DevRel evangelism type people that report to me. And we run that as, it's probably more like a Series B or C startup nowadays, but it's a team of
Yeah.
about 50 or 60 of us that essentially is the v0 team and is more of a customer. We're more of a customer and app built on top of Vercel as opposed to an embedded set of people that are each spread across all the various Vercel teams.
Brilliant. I was about to ask about the team structures and how does it work on a day-to-day basis. You already answered. Thank you. It's pretty good. So switching tracks to, I want to talk about the moats and margins kind of questions. So when I read about the v0 mission, right, founder spoke about the goal of reaching 100 million non-coding individual builders, right? And expanding far from the core of developers you have historically served, and you've also grown number of users, right, as you explained, in terms of all the additional persona, right? And what I also saw that a bit of contrast, what I found especially interesting was that more than 50% of v0's revenue comes from large enterprises. What explains that, and how do these core two GTM motions work together, self-serve and enterprise, for a company at your pace? Because a lot of companies today have self-serve and enterprise, but I'm fascinated by how that motion works now for your pace, and how do you
Yeah.
distinctly look at it?
Yeah, it's very surprising, honestly. I've been around many many companies in my career. In particular at Sequoia, I work with lots of our portfolio companies. The the place that we've gotten to with V0 is that it's really a bifurcated market, right? And so we have literally millions of individual users that come to us to build a thing, a side project. Many people, it's the first website or application they've ever built. And then on the other end, it's kind of a barbell. On the other end of the barbell, you have enterprises. Most of whom do not allow us to use their name, but it's like many of the Fortune 100 that are really, really excited, in particular about innovating the way that they work and the way that they build products. So I thought when Kaz took over Open Door, his write up of like, here's my expectations for how we're going to become an AI native company. His is more direct and in public than most of these companies, but essentially everybody has the same top down leadership directive. And it turns out V0 fits a incredibly important role in that transformation for those companies. So these large enterprises, they're thinking about in the past, I mean, some of them still maybe release a new version of their product quarterly. That's the thing I heard
Right.
in a call earlier this week, mind-boggling. They want to figure out how to make that monthly or weekly or daily. As opposed to on my team, we ship incremental versions of the product more than 100 times a day. And they see that a big part of that is reinventing this like software development lifecycle, and V0 can be incredibly useful for it. So the best example of this that I've seen is true both in these large enterprises and for individuals. It's in a meeting where you're discussing a product enhancement or something that could be better. Somebody in the meeting just pulls up V0 and starts building that version of that thing. I
Right.
first heard in that meeting, right? I first heard this from a YC founder who was talking about going to like a sales conversation with a potential prospect and doing all their discovery questions. But as they're asking the discovery questions, rather than write them into a
Okay.
document, exactly, they're building a version of it. And then 20 minutes into the meeting, they turn around and they say, hey, here's the product. Is this the type of thing that you want to use? And
Brilliant.
that the pace, the amount that you can speed up your process if you take that approach is gigantic. So that in particular is what these enterprises are very excited about buying and why so many of them are using the product. On the other hand, for the long tail, for the many millions of users that use V0, it's more about I want to build something for the first time. I want to experience the power of AI to actually like create and code something myself. And then the last point I'll make here is about the intersection between the two. So you asked about that. What's surprising to me is how much the PLG motion actually feeds the enterprise motion. We see at almost every one of these enterprises, there's a handful of people who started using it nights and weekends. For our free and self-serve users, about 60% of usage is nights and weekends, which is mind-boggling. Um, and they started using it nights and weekends and they got kind of addicted, or they started to realize, wow, this can actually really transform what I can do.
Right.
And then they come to us and say, I need this for every product manager at my
Right.
organization. Right.
Otherwise, a day job feels like a drag, right? Compared to
It,
the excitement of the what you can actually do in the weekends.
exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you operate in a category, right, that has competition springing up everywhere, right? And and it's exciting at the same time, right? And one of Vercel's leader had noted that the text to app innovation is fast and becoming commoditized. That Vercel's edge truly lies in its vertical integration. Was the quote. Can you unpack that for us a little bit and how it enables better customer value? And how do V0 versus infra offerings and open source frameworks together produce a uniquely defensive position?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would acknowledge that I think you're right. I've never seen a category with so much investment. There was a week recently where every single day a different startup that was in the text to app space was funded. That I just the ones that I saw, I think there's hundreds and hundreds of them at this point. Lots of whom are doing very interesting and innovative things. To your point, I think there's a handful of places where we're very differentiated. One is that we know we can be the best in the world at kind of the modern stack, the set of technologies that people use to build sites and applications nowadays. So Next.js, ShadCN, Tailwind, most of those people work for us, right? We are the creators of ShadCN and Next.js. But also we've made our models particularly good at writing that type of code. There are a number of advantages that come from that. And it's just the market norm. That's the type of thing that people want output. A second piece is that vertical integration, right? And that shows up in a number of different places. One of them is just the ease of taking something and actually deploying it. It's like very, very seamless. I just read a comparison yesterday of somebody used 6 different ones of these tools and was like, wow, this is so delightful and easy for me to use, for me to actually deploy the thing that I built. As an example, on other products, often you like build the thing and then you have to like export your code. These are many non-technical users. Export your code, figure out where you could upload it, figure out how to run it. It's like a many-step thing that most folks can't make it through, as opposed to just click a button. But there's other pieces of vertical integration that are very helpful. One of them, as an example, is security. Vercel has invested 10 years in making sure that like it's very difficult to publish an application that has credentials that could give people access to data they shouldn't have access to, as an example, or an API key where they could run up $100,000 bill on you overnight. And just by dint of being in the Vercel family, we get access to all of that. It's almost impossible for people to vibe code something in v0 and then deploy an insecure version of it. And we find that's like very valuable, in particular to these enterprises, right? They're terrified of like some random person builds something and deploys it to the internet
Yeah.
and it has an open AI key that a hacker can use to spend millions of their dollars.
Right.
So they appreciate working with a vendor that has invested in that so much, and where v0 basically gets to sit on top of that innovation and take advantage of it.
Beautiful. And I think the biggest difference I'm seeing in your articulation is this clear distinction of understanding between that individual user persona on the self-service mode and then the fears and ambitions and what drives that enterprise buyer, right? And I think it clearly comes out in the way you're talking about it.
Yeah. It's very interesting product development, right? Because you have to speak both of those languages, and they're very different languages, right? Like meeting with the teams of some of the Fortune 10 yesterday, I think we had 4 different meetings with various folks on that list, and their needs, they're thinking very extensively about security. They're thinking about access and how they can make sure that individual teams can share things just within their teams. They want to limit what people can upload. They want to have visibility into things that agents are doing. Sometimes they want to run the actual inference on their own infrastructure. This whole set of things that millions of long tail users have never thought about and will never think about. But you need to build a product that appeals to both of them. So it's a great, very interesting, compelling product problem.
Yeah. Beautiful. Do you see any trade-offs at all for this vertical integration approach from a customer perspective?
I think generally, I would say I think there's a number of use cases where there will emerge other products that are better for that use case. And we have an ethos at Vercel wanting to be very open. We want people to use the best product. I mean, we're largely an open source company, right? We want people to choose to use our products because they're best in the world, not because we lock them in artificially. As an example, there are lots of these tools that are built for designers, like Figma Make is a great one, but there's also a tool called Magic Patterns, Magic Path. There's a number of them. The tools built for designers are much more exploratory and much more like, as an example, one of the product patterns you see is you press a button and it will parallel build 4 versions of the same thing. So what you're doing is really exploring the set of possibilities, as opposed to v0, where we want you to get to something that's working. Like a lot of our use cases are, I want to build this prototype, or I want to build this internal application, or I want to build this dashboard or data visualization tool. Those use cases, people don't want to see 18 versions in parallel. They want to get to one that works and then iterate on it. So that's an example where like I want Figma or one of these companies to be wildly successful at serving designers. We think those designers at some point they're going to work with engineers or PMs that want to use a tool more like v0. But my tool can't speak every language for every user. I think that would be a losing proposition.
That's bad. That's a really good one. Switching to subjects, right? And pricing and packaging, right? Something
My
that's
favorite.
close to our heart. Yeah, and our bread
Of
and butter,
course.
right? And so in a post about a job opening on Vercel's pricing team, I found it fascinating to read, which is, does it take a quantum physics PhD from Caltech to do pricing at Vercel? Yes. At least that's what it took Harpreet Arora, who built Vercel pricing from nothing to something. Vercel CTO Malte says we are now very good at. Why is that? And how does Vercel's monetization strategy work across these 2 revenue streams as well?
Yeah, I would say that the v0 pricing packaging actually is easier in my mind. There's some constraints, there's some complexity, in particular because there's so many market entrants who have venture money and are willing to give their products away for free. But the Vercel problem is deeply complicated. The biggest reason for it is that it is an infrastructure product. So figuring out how to price for something like compute, right? It seems like it might be fairly straightforward. Like, oh, how do other folks charge for this? Or, oh, it's a machine, so we'll charge based on the count of machines.
Right.
But it turns out that does not work at all, and you need to get more sophisticated in a number of ways. So, uh, as an example, on compute, we did a huge amount of work. Harpreet specifically did this work very well to figure out that the structure that we wanted was to only charge people for what we call active CPU. That's when the machine is actually performing actions. It turns out for AI use cases, there's a huge amount of dead time where you'll have a server basically or a Lambda function, whatever it is, that receives something, it passes it to an LLM, and that LLM might process it for, in some cases, 50 seconds, 100 seconds, whatever it is, and then pass it back to the server. And if you charge people for the time that that server is waiting, it's wildly expensive for them. And on our side, we can do interesting engineering things to basically reuse that server time for other requests or other actions. So that was an example where on its surface, you think, okay, we just do count
Pass it through.
or wall time, exactly. And what we got to is much more sophisticated, much more aligned with the use cases that our customers are using us for or want to use us for, that in the past were prohibitively expensive. That's one SKU across about 50 on the infrastructure side of the business. So you think about that amount of work where we went deep into looking at competitors, looking at different options, even just structuring the active CPU pricing. It turns out there's a number of different ways that you can actually define when is it active, what do you charge for the downtime, et cetera. We have to do that many, many times, right? So it's not just that product, it's then our analytics products, our logging products, building like the actual experience of CI/CD, et cetera. And having somebody who is like smart enough to get incredibly deep in the details, and especially to do that in like a handful of days or a week, as opposed to a project that takes 6 months, is wildly effective. So I think that's why Harpreet is one of the most impactful people I've ever hired, and I think that's that depth of expertise, and then especially just like raw horsepower to go so deep in the details and find the correct answer. It's very helpful.
Brilliant. And what I'm also finding fascinating is the philosophy not to just pass it through and take the easier choice, but you seem to have, by aligning with customers' interest, you seem to have created a constraint that forced you to get creative with not pass through the cost, but find alternate ways of being better from a technology perspective, and actually disrupt yourself like that way, rather than letting that constraint come from somebody else saying, "Oh, it's too pricey."
Exactly. That was the very interesting part, is realizing like the feedback loop. If you do pricing really well, it's not build a product and then slap a price on it. It's start to think through this like innovative new product. Malta came
Yeah,
up with this concept of fluid compute maybe a year and a half ago now. Very innovative breakthrough concept. And then start figuring out the pricing structure for it and have this like bidirectional flow where you're informing the actual engineering breakthroughs that you need to come up with based
yeah.
on the market appetite and what people's preferences are. I think that's the best pricing teams in the world are very intimately connected with their engineering counterparts, as opposed to the we do all the work and then we get to the end and then we put a price tag
Yeah,
on it.
there seems to have been like the deep connection between that the product and feature and the value metric that you picked, and the feedback loop is not even from outside world, but the feedback loop is inherently built into the value metric nicely. And that forces like, okay, if you want to make more money, then the feedback loop is the control is back in the product to say you can actually do these things. If you figure out how to actually use it effectively, then we are going to make more money here, right?
Yeah,
Or improve
exactly.
margins. Yeah,
Yeah,
beautiful.
another aspect of this is that as we by making this change, by pricing based on what is appropriate for the customer, as opposed to just passing through our costs, like you mentioned,
Yeah,
we we take on both the downside risk of if we can't deliver on the engineering breakthroughs, but also the upside of if we're able to like further improve the efficiency of our system, which I love. I love that, like getting from just cost plus pricing into more value aligned approach.
thank you. With the amount of competition that you have in the market, right? I'm grateful that first of all you are willing to even like entertain and talk about some of these things as a playbook. So I really appreciate it.
Of course.
because these are hard-earned lessons, right? And that can serve as a competitive advantage. Like if you keep it close, at the same time you're willing to teach is
Yeah. I
thank
would
you
say
for
it's
doing
very hard to execute on. Like it's hard to
it.
get, there's only so many Caltech PhDs in the world, and how many of them want to work on
That's right.
infrastructure pricing? Um,
Right.
what I found is largely the frameworks and lessons are useful. It's very useful, and I've worked for lots of
Yeah,
smart people that have taught me smart things. But actually implementing them is the real challenge. So I feel like that's more where we get our competitive advantage.
very cool. And if I may ask one more question about pricing and packaging, um, what does it mean to treat pricing as an integral lever of the product given versus scale? And can you also share examples of pricing and packaging hypotheses that helped, especially on the retention and expansion side of the house?
Yeah. The biggest step for us on the first one was having the pricing function sit within engineering product design. We call it APD, basically not within finance or go to market or marketing or any of the other places it could sit. I think for a very highly technical product and a team of such high caliber engineers, that was the right place for it. And it makes it much easier to have this virtuous cycle and positive feedback
Beautiful.
loop. Um, what was the second half of the question?
Any particular lessons on the retention and expansion?
Retention and expansion. Yeah. So what we saw there is that it's really about expanding the number of use cases where Vercel or v0 is the right choice, right? And so you start with, it turns out Vercel is incredibly easy to the CI/CD process of just like I have a thing and I want it deployed and it just works basically every time. And then it's deployed globally and it's like structured in such a way that the thing is just fast and performant everywhere. That value prop, people love it. It's unsurprising, but many people care deeply about that. And you see that and all of the metrics around it. It turns out that's a fairly small slice of the like total set of things that people care about. And if we can expand into adjacent use cases, that's really, really valuable. So I'll give you a handful of examples there. One is the recent AI gateway. We built our compute such that it was great for running AI workloads. And then people wanted a seamless, like very easy way to get the actual to integrate the model providers. We also have the AI SDK, which is the dominant way that people do this on the open source side. And we realized, hey, if we build this piece of infrastructure, if we make it so that people can buy their tokens from us, we give them a bunch of value added stuff and we essentially charge them nothing for it, that's a fairly compelling pitch to them. And what that does is it takes that user that's only using us for the CI/CD and hosting side of things to using us for another adjacent use case. Another one is security. So many of our largest enterprise customers, they're using legacy vendors like an Akamai as an example for the CDN security side of things. And it's really expensive, it's slow, it's frustrating for them. And being able to replace that with a tool that is uh, just much more modern and full featured and better for what they need to do. It both fulfills their security needs and then also speeds up their applications. Where if you're an e-commerce or SaaS company, we know statistically how impactful that can be. Those are examples where we took the like initial value prop and what we built for the first handful of years of Vercel and expanded that into adjacencies that have really allowed us to your point about NDR, to increase the NDR of our customer base.
Right, right. That's wonderful. Thanks for those examples. That connects the dots beautifully. Thank you. I want to talk about one thing related to again the pricing changes. Um, this is the last question on I want to ask about pricing. Promise.
I love
the
pricing. I'm happy to talk about it forever.
of course, right. The vertical you spoke about the vertical integration and the fact that users can generate AI apps and deploy them on Vercel end to end. In what way does that drive pricing decisions at v0?
It's a good question. I would say the biggest initial question we had is, should this be the same product? Should v0 be an aspect of the Vercel product? When you buy a Vercel seat, should it come with v0? And we actually did think that that was the correct thing to do. We're like, oh, this is all part of the same vertically integrated journey. Then we did a bunch of customer research, and this is something that if I could only do one thing in pricing and packaging, I would talk to lots of customers, but we surveyed hundreds of them. We did probably 30 structured interviews to ask them about it. And the majority of customers didn't want this. So they were like, this is different set of people, it's different use cases, different teams. It's just confusing for them to be the same product, and people will end up trying to use Vercel to vibe code something and looking at a dashboard that shows all of their active deployments as opposed to v0. So because of that, we decided to end up with a structure that we have today, which is v0 has its own pricing and packaging, very similar to the rest of this set of tools in the market. And then Vercel has continued to use what it's used for um, the last year or so since we made a number of changes. I think that's the place that we got to. As we think about the third act in the future, it will be very interesting. I think we're going to re-examine that choice in the next handful of months and make another decision when, as we see the use cases are getting more, people are doing more soup to nuts, everything starting in v0 all the way through hosting and running their application, and it all is more of a cohesive experience. When that's true, I think we need to revisit that. I think it's much more likely that we'll end up in a scenario where every seat gives you access to both things. And yes, most people will fall into a category where they primarily use one side or the other side of the house, but the whole thing is more of a cohesive product and customer experience.
Right. And I love that you're actually talking about the product evolution, customer expectation, very much tied with how pricing will evolve with this cycle, which is music to
Yeah,
my ears.
exactly. I love that we call our pricing people PMs. Actually, Adobe does this also, and I think it's just the correct way to think about it because pricing abstracted from the product decisions you're making or the needs of your users, it's a great way to make terrible decisions.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. So near term, near future. To wrap this up, you recently said anyone with a 5-year vision in the AA space is out of their mind. Right? So what's your wild 2-year vision for V0? And it's probably, if you can also touch upon pricing, if you have a theory around it, that will be great. And how do you see both the product and pricing? Is there a evolution that you are able to visualize in the next 2 years?
Very interesting. The pricing, I'll start with pricing. There was a hypothesis that token costs would fall to zero. I think a year ago, people were really excited about that, and people kept saying like, "Oh, token costs are going to cost nothing." So, especially around when DeepSeek came out,
Right.
that has not come to pass. I don't know. I see token budgets increasing with everybody that I talk to, as opposed to decreasing, and people are really excited about using the frontier models like a Sonnet or GPT-5 or whatever it might be, as opposed to the cheap, low cost ones. So what our hypothesis is that people are going to continue to choose best in class over cheap for many use cases. And their expectation when they're buying tokens is that they cost what they cost in the market, right? And so if you have, there was an AI pricing approach where you would basically mark up your tokens. So if you're consuming tokens in v0 or whatever the tool is, the Vercel agent as an example, we would charge double what we're paying for those tokens. We think customers are not willing to do that, and we see them voting with their feet.
Right.
What we've gotten to instead is these hybrid models where basically you sell tokens more or less at cost, right? And then you capture value elsewhere. So as an example, in the v0 land, we have seats that people use. And some of those people are incredibly prolific and they build many, many things. It's wild to see our power users, how much they use the product. And then other folks build, like PMs as an example, they write one PRD every 2 weeks and they build their prototype for that PRD, but they're probably spending a couple hours in v0 over that time. So the number of tokens they're consuming is much lower. That distribution means you can make your margin on the seat side of the business, and then your tokens you can give to your customers more or less at cost. I think that's the model that almost everybody is going to get to. I think it's the most customer aligned and the one that customers find most appropriate.
Beautiful. I can visualize that. It's a good one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The vision, long-term vision for my product, I think we want, I'm a skeptic of long-term visions. I keep writing 6-month visions, and then a month later, we've shipped almost everything on the list. And it is wild to me. This has happened 3 separate times in the last couple months. The couple-year vision, I really do think that the way people build software is being radically redefined. And I'm excited about that. I mean, I just think about people who still, there are many large companies that still use like a waterfall approach to building software. It's like mind-boggling, but it's real. And then there's even smaller companies or individuals that it takes them weeks to build a new feature. We think that there is a very different way of building software that will have the set of tools and like interfaces that we use to manage the agents in particular that are building that is it's actually not that different than today. Like as an example, we think a Kanban view or some sort of a cards-based view can be really helpful for doing things like reviewing the changes that your agents are making. But I'm really excited about taking v0 and Vercel and building more tools that support more stages of that software development lifecycle, basically enabling folks in the future to, in the future, 9 months from now, 12 months from now, to be able to like more seamlessly understand what this new approach to building software is, and then have the right interface, the right modality, the right approach for each stage of that software development lifecycle.
Brilliant. Then when you are talking about it, like wheels are spinning, like thinking about some of these things, because you can easily visualize if you have a robust API infrastructure for pretty much all the capabilities that you offer, your interfaces and how you actually think about it, the building the feedback loops around it, and how quickly you can iterate on top of this is much easier because the rest is set.
Exactly. Like as an example, the Vercel preview deployment is incredibly valuable for this type of thing. So if you have a set of agents that are building lots of different features for you, you can't just ship all that code to your customers. Clearly, that would be a bad choice. So what you really want is a way to actually explore that version of the application, or even send a QA agent to explore it and check out, hey, does this work? What feedback do we have? Building that from scratch is complicated to get right, and it's something Vercel spent years getting right. And it's one of these like primitives or tools that we can integrate into that kind of cohesive software building experience. I think there's lots of things like that we get because we're part of Vercel, that the rest of the ecosystem, I talk to them and they're spending large amounts of their engineering time just building those kind of like basic building blocks that we have the advantage of already having.
I have to send this recording immediately to our product engineering leaders immediately, like today. This is going to be fascinating. So one last question. Is there a book that you've gone back to as you've like grown phenomenally in this company and over the past couple of years? Is there a particular book that you go back again and again that you would recommend?
I have a number of books. One I recommend to every product person is this book, Algorithms to Live by Brian Christensen. It is a great expose of some of the kind of core CS algorithms that are useful. I just was in a debate with Jazz, one of our pricing folks, last night, talking about the greedy algorithm and making decisions that feel like they're only optimizing for the short term, and how actually in many cases that is the optimal path. Like if you're selling into the enterprise, I think what are the decisions that get me more enterprise customers this quarter is almost definitely the path that's going to get you to the largest number 2 or 3 or 4 years from now. Pricing is a place where I think the greedy algorithm can often go south, and I saw that actually at Segment. We made choices to maximize short-term revenue that really hurt the long-term growth of the company. But that's a great book. The other one is Scale, which is a very useful expose of lots of the it looks at the natural world and things like the evolution of cities. There's a great story in the book where he describes every city, basically every city that's ever been founded still exists. You know, more than 99% of them do. On the other hand, every company that's founded dies, right? And the expected lifespan of a company is how long it's been around so far. And I think there's a number of like lessons you can learn from that just you take in, and it's this little thing that sits in the back of your brain and helps you make meaningfully better decisions. So those are two of them that I consistently recommend.
Love it. Love it. I wonder like where the recommendation for Scale came from, because it's out of the complete, like in a different field. And it's a beautiful way to actually connect these dots.
That book, both of them were Long Now Foundation and SF. They give these talks. Brian, the guy who wrote Algorithms to Live By, is an incredible speaker. I would actually recommend just watching him talk about some of the lessons from that book as opposed to reading it. And Jeffrey, I forget his last name, who wrote Scale, both of them gave talks there. So I happened to go to the talks and just got addicted to the like concepts that they were talking about and bought the books, and now I've internalized them.
What was the name of the foundation again, please?
The Long Now Foundation.
Long Now Foundation. Okay, we'll check it out. Awesome. This is fantastic.
Love it. Appreciate the time, Chris.
Thank you.
Very fun.
Thank you so much for taking the time out to share these valuable lessons. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.